أبدأ بالحمد مصليا على محمد خير نبي أرسلا وذي من أقسام الحديث عدة وكل واحد أتى وحده أولها الصحيح وهو ما اتصل إسناده ولم يشذ أو يعل.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We'll continue inshallah المنظومة البيقونية, the poetry of the science of hadith, and we started with the first two lines of the introduction to the Shaykh's poetry, and today inshallah we'll speak about al-hadith al-sahih, the authentic hadith and the conditions of this hadith. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it beneficial inshallah. The Shaykh alayhi rahmatullah ta'ala said, أولها, the first, الصحيح وهو ما اتصل إسناده ولم يشذ أو يعل أو يشذ أو يعل يرويه عدل ضابط عن مثله معتمد في ضبطه ونقله. So he said أولها, the first of the categories that we mentioned before. The first is the الصحيح. The word صحيح literally means sound, healthy, strong. So what is hadith صحيح? When do we call hadith صحيح? He mentioned here 5 conditions. أولها الصحيح وهو ما اتصل. We'll read the lines in order first, then we'll explain it inshallah with illustration. أولها الصحيح. First is the sound. ما اتصل. You have a connected chain. You remember the chain, al-isnad, it's all connected. إسناده ولم يشذ, and it doesn't contradict or it's not irregular. ولم يعل, and there is no hitting defect. يرويه, that is narrated by. عدل, upright. ضابط, ضابط, precise. عن مثله, from his alike or from his like. Okay. معتمد, reliable. في ضبطه ونقله, reliable in his precision as well as his transmission. So these are the 5 conditions that you mentioned. حديث صحيح. اتصل إسناده بنقل عدل ضابط عن مثله إلى منتهى من غير شذوذ ولا علة قادحة. Okay, so what are the 5 conditions now? The 5 conditions of hadith al-sahih, that the chain of the narrator is connected. Number 2, it's narrated by upright, يعني each person in the chain is upright, adl. Every person in the chain is precise. So from beginning to end, okay, on or from his alike, يعني all of them from beginning to end has to be upright and precise. And these are the 3 things that has to exist. 2 things the chain has to be, or the hadith has to be free from. Defect, a heading defect, or contradiction, illah, irregularity. So the first condition is what? First condition, that the hadith has to be connected. What does connected mean? Connected mean that every narrator have heard from the one before him. Every narrator in the hadith have heard from the person who came before him. They have met. He has studied with him. They lived at the same time. There's possibility that they have met one another. He read directly to him, or he read to someone to him, and he mentioned that someone in the chain. So every person must have heard from the person who came before him for the chain to be connected. Okay? Now, that is the first part. So this example will give us some illustration, inshallah, and the explanation. Imam al-Bukhari narrated, alayhi rahmatullah ta'ala, from the authority of Abdullah ibn Yusuf. He said, حدثنا Abdullah ibn Yusuf. Abdullah ibn Yusuf told us. So he heard from him directly. That he said, Imam Malik told us. So Abdullah ibn Yusuf heard from Imam Malik. Imam Malik heard from Imam Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, alayhi rahmatullah. Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri heard from Muhammad ibn Jubayr ibn Mut'am, radiyallahu anhu arda. He heard from Muhammad ibn Jubayr. Muhammad ibn Jubayr heard from his father, the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Jubayr ibn Mut'am. So if we look at this hadith, is it connected? We look back. Al-Bukhari said, I heard from Abdullah ibn Yusuf. Abdullah ibn Yusuf heard from Imam Malik. Imam Malik heard from Imam al-Zuhri. Imam al-Zuhri heard from Muhammad ibn Jubayr. Muhammad ibn Jubayr heard from his father Jubayr ibn Mut'am radiyallahu anhu, the great companion. And Jubayr ibn Mut'am said, I prayed after Rasulullah sallallahu Salat al-Maghrib, and he read Surah At-Tur in Salat al-Maghrib. Now the scholars will look at the chain and they'll make sure every one of them have heard. So they will call that what? Connected chain. Yani there is no one missing. There is no connection in between that was dropped. They all heard from one another, and in this hadith they all said haddathana, like told us, or we heard directly from him. So this is the first condition for hadith to be sound or authentic. And scholars have to go through this process every time they check upon the hadith. Number 2, upright. بنقل عدل. Every person you saw in the chain here has to be what? Upright. What does al-adala mean? What is someone who's adl? If you study these 5 conditions of upright, you would know. Muslim at the time of narrating the hadith. Maybe they heard it when they were disbelievers, like the hadith of Abu Sufyan when narrated with Hiraql, hadith of Mu'abad, hadith of Anas, hadith that they heard before Islam and they narrate after they became Muslim. So Islam when narrating, when transmitting, Muslim, baligh, mature, same rule. When they are transmitting the hadith, okay? Now when they heard, because they could have heard at age 6 and they memorized the hadith. Most of the Sahaba heard Rasulullah when they were very young, and then they narrated when they got older. Aqil, sane, makes sense, the person has to be sane to narrate a hadith. Salimun min asbab al-fisq, that he's free from overt sin. Yani, fisq is disobedient. When do we call someone fasiq? Very simple, to make clause very simple, very easy inshallah. Anyone who stays away from major sins and does not insist on minor sins, then that person is free from disobedience. He doesn't cause major sins. He doesn't fall into major sins, and at the same time he doesn't insist. We all make mistakes. We all sin. We are humans, but he doesn't insist on sinning. Okay, so that individual, that person is, what do we call him? Adl. Now, number 5, for someone to be adl, for someone to be upright, he has to be free from anything that is against the natural or the culture. He doesn't go against the norm of people, which of course, not the norm if people do haram, but he doesn't outstand, okay? He doesn't cause things that people will point at him, or things that he will be outstanding in the community that don't do this or don't practice that way. Salima min khawar, like at the time of Imam Ahmad, it will be a form of, against the manners and etiquette to eat in the streets in front of people. So anybody who does that will cause him to fall into the condition number 5. So these are the 5 conditions for a person to be called upright, adl. So every narrator from the hadith has to have these, characteristic in him. Now, precision, ad-dabt. Precision is someone who has good memory, and they memorize their hadith. Someone whom his book is saved from any corruption or any misuse of his book, okay? Or someone who narrates the hadith by meaning has to understand the meaning of the hadith and not exchange words to change the meaning of the statement. So that person is precise if he narrates from his memory, okay? And a lot of the scholars had good memory. Imam Bukhari memorized 1,000,000 hadith. Imam Ahmad memorized 1,000,000 hadith, a million chain. A lot of A'immah memorized so many hadith, and they would remember it right on the spot whenever they need it. So that's precision. It has to be dabtun tam, complete precision. Or if he is reading from the book has to be, we have to make sure that the book is also precise, in a sense of no one added a word to it. Some people would borrow the book those days, and they would copy the book into their book. How do we know that this person did not add anything to it or took out anything? So the scholar has to know. Beautiful story of Imam Ahmad when he traveled with Ahmad ibn al-Fadl and Yahya ibn Ma'in to al-Fadl ibn Zukayn, alayhi rahmatullah. And Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in said, I am going to test him. Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, don't do that, he's precise. He said, I want to see how precise he is. So when they came to al-Fadl ibn Zukayn, Imam Ahmad sat on his right side, Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in sat on his left, next to him on the chair, and Ahmad ibn al-Fadl sat on the ground. So, and Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in said, I would read to him his book and I will add some of the hadith that is not his. If he realized those hadith, if he's paying attention, he knows that these hadith are not his, then he's precise. So he started reading, he read the first hadith, okay, al-Fadl ibn Zukayn is quiet, second hadith, third hadith, fourth hadith, he added a hadith that is not from the narration of al-Fadl. So he said, stop, that's not my hadith. لا أعرفه, I don't know this hadith. He moved on. Another hadith. He said, I don't know this hadith. Third on. No. So he knew that this is a trick. So he looked at Ahmad ibn Fadl and he said, he's too weak to do that. Like, yeah, he can't, I don't think this is his trick. He looked at Ahmad ibn Hanbal and he said, he's too, too polite to do something like that. He looked at Yahya ibn Ma'in and he kicked him with his feet off the desk of the chair. And he said, Wallahi, it's your trick. I know it would be you. Ahmad ibn Hanbal told Yahya ibn Ma'in, I told you, don't do it. He's precise. He's firm. He knows his hadith by heart, not just that you write it in the book and he think it's his, you could add anything. قال يحيى والله, the kick that he gave me is better than all my trip to seek the hadith. Why? Because I am sure of Al-Fadl ibn Dukayn being a precise, trustworthy person. So if a person carries upright, he's upright and all the companions are upright. So we count from after the companions. And they are precise, we could call them what? Thiqah. Okay? Trustworthy. Like the chain that we just gave. So the ulama, when they look at this chain, they will say Imam al-Bukhari is a great scholar, Imam, one of the great narrators of hadith. Okay? Abdullah ibn Yusuf, thiqatun mutqin, he is a trustworthy, reliable. Imam Malik, Imamun Hafiz, a great Imam, very strong in memory and memorization and knowledge and precision. Imam al-Zuhri, thiqatun hafizun mutqinun, some of them says Imamun ala jalalatihi wa itqani, he's great Imam, one of the great, most trustworthy, reliable, precise scholar. Muhammad ibn Jubayr, thiqah, trustworthy. And he is the son of Jubayr ibn Mut'im, who is a companion, and all companions are upright. All companions are udul. Okay, they're trustworthy. So they look, is it connected? Yes, everyone have heard it. They're all upright, they're all precise. So the judgment upon the hadith will be that this hadith is authentic because it follows the first three. No, not yet. Well, we said it has to be free from two things: hidden defect, al-illa, and irregularity. What is hidden defect? ما هي العلة؟ العلة هي سبب خفي يقدح في صحة الحديث. It's a hidden defect that causes weakness to the hadith. So you have to have two things here. It's hidden, realize that it's hidden. It's a defect that causes weakness. So for example, if I say, Imam Bukhari said that someone said that somebody told me. Who's that somebody? Nobody know him. We don't know if he's trustworthy. He's unknown. That is a hidden defect. Or if two people, they haven't met each other. One was born year 159. The other person, one was born year 160. His sheikh that he claims he heard from died year 155. Impossible that they have heard. Impossible that they have met. He died before his birth. That is a hidden defect. We wouldn't know that till we search the date of birth, the date of death. Where did he travel? Which city did he go to? That's why Imam al-Bukhari's conditions plus these 5 is that they have to affirm that they have met. So this is a hidden defect that causes harm to the hadith. There are hidden defects that don't cause harm. It's a defect, but don't cause harm to the hadith. Like switching names of two trustworthy, like Abdullah ibn Dinar, Malik ibn Dinar. If somebody said Abdullah said, but it was actually Malik, not Abdullah ibn Dinar, well, both are trustworthy. So they won't cause harm to the hadith. It's just a matter of a defect. It's a problem. Or if somebody says, a man came to the Prophet asking him about Islam, and he said this, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I will do this and this. Who's this man? He's unknown. That's a defect, but it doesn't affect. Why? Because all companions are trustworthy. We only need to know his name if there's ruling and there's contradiction and so on and so on. So that is a defect, and we'll come to the ilal later in detail, inshallah, and Shaykh mentioned. It has to be free from ash-shudhuz. Ash-shudhuz is contradiction. Whether is a person contradicting others who are more than him in number, more than him in knowledge, more reliable than him, or contradiction to other evidence that is stronger. So you have Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Ahmad, Imam al-Tirmidhi, Imam Ibn Hibban narrating a hadith. Imam al-Tabarani narrates a hadith. Imam al-Tabarani is a great scholar, and they're great scholars. He contradicts what these 5 narrates. Well, his hadith will be irregular, shadh. We won't accept it. It's not fabricated because the Imam is reliable, but it's against. It contradicts the more stronger evidence or the more strong number. Or if you have 2 scholars, then who's more knowledgeable? Who's more preferred over the other? So it has to be from any irregularity or any shudhud in the chain for the chain to be authentic. Now these 5 conditions, connected chain with a trustworthy narrator who is upright and precise, free from defect and free from الشذوذ. Hadith sahih are two types. Hadith sahih in itself, yani restricted to the hadith, yani follows all the 5 conditions. Hadith sahih due to other factors, yani two ahadith coming together, two good hadith coming together to bring up an authentic narration. We'll study that inshallah when we get to the hadith al-hasan. Now, when we have a hadith sahih, do they have levels? Yes. Level in sense of what? Level in sense of the narrator themselves, like Imam Bukhari would choose, who's the most reliable. And Imam al-Iraqi mentioned that this is a difference of opinion among the scholars. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala will say Malik, Nafi' ibn Umar, the most authentic, alayhi rahmatullah. Yahya ibn Ma'in will say Al-A'mash, Ibrahim, Al-Qama from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Ishaq ibn Rahawayh and Imam Ahmad will say Al-Zuhri from Salim, from his father, Abdullah ibn Umar. This is the most authentic. Well, it's a difference of opinion on what is the golden chain. Which is the golden chain? So every scholar has his own golden chain, okay? But we're talking about level of authenticity on which one to be accepted more, which one comes first. And the first that they all agreed upon. All the scholars of hadith like Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmad, Tirmidhi becomes mutawatir. Now, the hadith there is related by al-Bukhari, agreed upon by al-Bukhari and Muslim, level 1. Then the hadith that is agreed or related by al-Bukhari, and then the hadith that is related by Muslim alone. And then the hadith that is related based on the conditions of al-Bukhari and Muslim. And then the hadith that is related based on al-Bukhari conditions, and then the hadith related based on Muslim, and then the hadith that is narrated by the others. So this is the level. And Bukhari and Muslim agreed upon, muttafaqun alayh. This is the agreed upon. When they say agreed upon, they are referring to al-Bukhari and Muslim. Most authentic. If they agreed upon hadith, khalas. Now, al-Bukhari, what Imam Bukhari narrated, his sahih is higher than Imam Muslim overall. Not every single hadith, but overall. Not every chain. Imam Bukhari has 7,500 some hadith, 4,000 without reputation. Imam Muslim has 12,000, 4 without reputation. Every hadith in al-Bukhari is more authentic than every hadith in Muslim? La. Overall, the hadith in Bukhari are more reliable than the hadith in Muslim. More strong than the hadith of Muslim. Now, what Imam Muslim narrates, what is based on their conditions? What are their conditions? Connected chain, upright, reliable, precise, no defect, no irregularity, no shudud, no contradiction. Add Imam Bukhari's condition, that's why he came before Imam Muslim, that they both have met. Every narrator have met by affirmed evidence. The scholars whom he narrates from by affirmation. That's why Imam Bukhari al-Sahih is the most Sahih. Did he collect all the Sahih? No, he left behind some. He said, I memorized 100,000 hadith. Authentic. He only wrote 4,000 in his book. And he memorized 200,000 that are not authentic. Imam al-Tirmidhi has a lot of hadith sahih. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala in the Musnad. Imam al-Hakim rahimahullah ta'ala, Ibn Hibban, and so many other books. Sunan Abi Dawood, and so many. Imam Malik, they used to say al-Muwatta asahhu kitab ba'da kitab Allah. The most authentic after the book of Allah is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. They say this is before al-Bukhari wrote his Sahih. But al-Bukhari wrote only the Sahih, only the authentic, the most reliable in the collection of al-Jami' al-Sahih by Imam al-Bukhari. So many books to collect the hadith. The ruling is what? Out of this, that if the hadith is Sahih, إذا صح الحديث, with the authentic chain, then it's an obligation upon the Muslim to act upon it. The understanding of the hadith, and that's a different story, that's fiqh. We're talking about acting upon the hadith as accepting the hadith. If we say this hadith narrated by Bukhari and Muslim and the ulama has accepted and it's agreed upon and all the conditions are met, no one has the right to come and say, well, I reject this hadith. I don't believe it's authentic. How do I know that these narrators are? Well, they have heard from one another. They have followed the conditions. They went through a process to give you this result of saying hadithun sahih. Hadith is sahih, or the isnad is sahih, the chain is sahih, the isnad is sound or authentic. This is the first category, the most important, the one that we act upon in aqidah, in ahkam, in rulings, and in fada'il, in the virtues of our deeds. We'll continue inshallah in the next episode with more ahadith categories. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this beneficial. Allahumma ameen. Jazakum Allah khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.